Good afternoon, and thank you for the organizers the opportunity to present this project. So the topic of my presentation is a childhood diet focusing on breastfeeding and the weaning, the process of weaning of the two Neolithic populations from Hungary. This project is part of my PhD research. The aim of this research was to compare stable isotope results from children to the same results from adults. So the sites. Polgár Ferenci Hát and Polgár Csőszhalom are located in northeastern Hungary in the so-called Polgár microregion. Polgár Ferenci Hát can be dated to the middle Neolithic period, and Polgár Csőszhalom belongs to the late Neolithic period. In the case of the two sites, the archaeological materials came from rescue excavations. So the first one, just a few words about the sites. The first one is Polgár Ferenci Hát. As I mentioned, it's located in the northern part of the Great Hungarian Plain. During the excavations, two settlement phases were identified in the area. The first phase represented by a few clay pits and now 7 graves according to the new radiocarbon results. In the second occupation phase, in the center area, the excavator succeeded in found a detail of an oval-shaped multiply circular ditch system. Within the ditches, the settlement was very intensive. The remains of 2 burnt houses, thick fill layer, and several round and beehive-shaped food storage pits were identified. A total of 115 burials were unearthed during the excavations. These were grouped in small to large clusters of 3 to 10 graves. They were concentrated in the area of the ditches and the boundaries. In general, the grave pits were rectangular or trapezoidal shaped. In some cases, however, the dead were placed in beehive-shaped storage pits. The typical orientation of the grave was southeast to northwest, but some deviated from this. This pattern was common in the Alföld linear pottery culture, as well as in the LBK, the linear band culture. According to the burial rite, the dead were usually laid on their left side in a crouched position. In 82 graves, there was no grave good. In 16, there was a single vessel, sometimes more than one. This is the most common type of grave goods in the ALP. Polished stone chisels or obsidian blades were found in 6 graves, and in 7 graves also contained jewelry accessories. The burial practices observed and described at Polgár Ferenci Hát are very similar to those observed at other sites of the culture. This site is the largest settlement with burials in the region with this culture. The next one, so the materials. This slide shows the distribution of graves by sex and the major age groups. We have stable isotope data from 33 adults from previous studies, but these are just from bones. So for these presentations, I can't use these. And 29 data from children, which I analyzed previously. And we also sampled an additional 25 adults for my PhD research. Okay. The next one is Polgár Csőszhalom, located in the same microregion as Polgár Ferenci Hát, very close to each other. There's a 4-meter-high mound, the tell, rising from the plain, and the artifacts found there attracted the attention of researchers at the beginning of the 20th century. The first excavations was led by Ida Bognán Kuciár in 1957. The single-layer settlement, which is in this presentation, is located next to the tell. Also came light during the rescue excavation related to the construction of the M3 motorway. We have totally 123 graves. The burials were generally aligned with the houses and located near the entrance. Some of the dead were placed in clay pits, and 2 children were placed in post holes. The general shape of the graves were rectangular, with rounded corners, straight walls, and a flat bottom. The typical orientation was south-northwest, with only a few exceptions. Women were typically laid on their left side, while men were usually laid on their right side in a crouched position. Due to this strictly defined ritual, it was possible to identify the graves of children. Traces of ochre paint were observed in 25% of the graves. And also for the materials, distribution by graves by sex and the major age groups. We have results from 7 adults from the previous studies, but it's also from just bunkology, and 29 data from children. And we also sampled an additional 79 adults for the PhD research. And just a few words about the methods. All the samples were extracted and measured at the Institute for Geological and Geochemical Research of the Research Center for Astronomy and Earth Sciences in Budapest, Hungary. Collagen was extracted from the organic part of the teeth, and the ratios of carbon and nitrogen isotopes were measured from it. And from the inorganic apatite part of the teeth, we looked at the ratios of carbon and nitrogen isotopes. And the question were the follows: is there a difference in childhood diet between those who died in childhood and those who lived into adulthood? And for now on, for short, I use the term child and adult to present the results and to talk about easier. So the two terms, children, child and adult. And are there differences in breastfeeding habits and the weaning process of children and adults? Are there differences in dietary habits between the sexes and age groups? Are there changes over time and space, comparing the results from the two sites, which is spanning about 1,000 years? And for the results. In this presentation, I just show some of the main results, but before talking about it, it is important to know that these are still preliminary, as the measurement data are still coming in. The first figure shows a comparison of isotope ratio values measured from the dentin part of the teeth. Children and adults are plotted separately by the two types. It is clearly visible that the first permanent molars from children and the second permanent molars from adults form distinct groups, and they are separate from others. If we take a closer look at the graph, shows that children's first permanent molars have a bit higher nitrogen values in average than adults' first permanent molars. These have the breastfeeding signal. However, this is more likely due to the larger sample size. But it is interesting to note that the adult first and second permanent molars are much closer to each other in the terms of nitrogen values. The adult second permanent molars that are outliers in carbon isotope ratio values are also interesting. Okay, the next one. Because of the biological sexes of the adults were known, I was able to examine their childhood eating habits by the sexes. The first permanent molars of females have relatively high nitrogen levels, with one exception. There is a clear shift in isotope ratio values between the first and the second permanent molars, which is indicating the process of weaning. For men, there is a greater variance in the same tooth types. Perhaps individual preferences were more important during breastfeeding and or at the weaning process. However, it is interesting to note that there is a difference between men and women between the age of 2.5 and 8. It seems as if men were able to consume more animal protein and a more varied plant protein-based diet after weaning. But we have a very low sample size. Okay, the next one. The comparison of carbon isotope ratio values from the dentin and the enamel parts of the teeth shows a similar picture. Children who had very high nitrogen values in the previous figure are shown now at the bottom of the graph. Okay. Presumably, their early deaths may have been caused by some disease. We think that because they have a very, very high nitrogen level. But the post-weaning nutrition of adults show a really varied picture. This will also be of interest when grouping them by sexes. And then, as I mentioned in the previous slide, there is a wide variation in the post-weaning eating habits of adults. This is especially for men. The values from women form a well-defined group. Men, however, show a large variation, which may suggest that their carbohydrate and plant protein intake was much more varied than that of women. We still have very little data from adults in polgárcsőszhalom, as measurements are still ongoing. Therefore, these results are only preliminary. So fresh, I got the new results yesterday evening. The results are shown according to the types of teeth of children and adults. On the left side, the carbon and the nitrogen values measured from the dentin are shown. On the right side, the comparison of collagen and carbon is shown. The values appear to be quite homogeneous. I grouped these values according to the biological sexes as well. Thanks to the strict burial rites observed at this site, it was possible to determine maybe the possible biological sexes of the children based on the placement of the body in the grave and or the grave goods. And also for the adults, than the known sexes. The figure on the left shows that the first permanent molars of girls and the third permanent molars of adults show the greatest variability within their groups. The figure on the right also shows individual variation within the groups. Finally, I compared the stable isotope values of the two sites. Although the values show relative homogeneity, it seems that the values belonging to polgárcsőszhalom occupy a bit narrower range in both figures. Of course, it may only appear this way in light of the current data. And for the summary, the signal of breastfeeding and the process of weaning were observed at both sites. The slight difference between the sexes was observed at Polgár Ferenci hát. At polgárcsőszhalom, no conclusions can be drawn yet due to the low sample size. Childhood feeding habits were basically similar at both sites. So we have a lot to do in the near future, and we have a lot of data. And thank you for your attention.